couldn't say.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
It's 6:30. It's the September 25th Oak Harbor City Planning Commission meeting. Chairman Wassinger and Vice Chairman Freeman are both absent. The remaining members of the Planning Commission are all here, so we do have a quorum. Second item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes from the August 28th.
I
meeting.
second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? So the minutes are approved. Third item on the agenda is public comment. We accept public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of the Planning Commission meeting. I do see members of the public present, so we will open that public comment session for anybody who'd like to speak.
Hello, my name is Gray Jordan, and I live at 651 Southeast Bay Shore Drive, Oak Harbor, Washington. I've got a couple of little stories to tell. One of them's kind of funny. And then I have a handout, and then I will get out of your hair. A couple of years ago, I sat in that room with the mayor at the time, several councilmen, the police chief, a couple of other policemen. We were concerned that the city at the time was having an awful lot of conversation about the Element nightclub. And I was a concerned citizen. I live across the street. We had that meeting, and I was amazed, and I was very pleased when the mayor said, we need to do whatever we can before someone gets hurt. And I totally agreed with him. And ultimately, the problem solved itself. But somebody did get hurt because of the atmosphere at the Element. Now, to lighten it up a little bit, the useless fact that you probably never needed to know until today. If you step onto the curb in front of Cucci Real Estate on Pioneer, step on the curb and walk this way for the entire business district to Midway, there are 7 crosswalks. There is 1 on Bayshore. And I don't need to tell you what else is on Bayshore. There's a lot of stuff on Bayshore. There are 62 residences, the bus station, 3 parks, government license facility, and I hear a new restaurant going in where the Element is going in. So I have a proposal for you to consider. And this is about crosswalks,
Thank you.
radar speed signs at Alfie's. Alfie's has signed off on this. Carlos has signed off on this. Dr. Dawn Chiropractic has signed off on this. Dock Street Condos has signed off on this. Waterside Condos has signed off on this. Fred Walrath, just back from the hospital, agreed with me. Merrill Carpet Cleaning. That's the second or the third page is some of the people that have supported this proposal in about 22 hours. I came up with this 22 hours ago when I talked to Brian Mars and we were just talking about how he won't come downtown without a gun. Because I don't like to have that where I live. I feel I need to be concerned. So, please review the proposal, and I am starting kind of a campaign, and you just are lucky enough to be the first public meeting since I thought this up. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Any other public comment? Okay, we will close the public comment period at this time and move to agenda item number 4, public meeting for the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Amendments.
Hi there. Good evening. Cat Kamak, Senior Planner. So we're continuing our 2018 Comprehensive Plan Amendments. We've kind of done this almost all year long with every Planning Commission meeting. We talk about some of the amendments that we're making progress on. Some of them, like on the 2018 comprehensive plan amendments will probably spill over into 2019 to complete some of the work, but that's all right. We'll just keep that open as we go into 2019. But the capital improvements plan is something that we have looked at every year. We do this annually. We look at it. We're not required to look at it annually, but we do. For several reasons. We look at it for projects that we've completed, projects that have been added due to council action, funding sources change, project costs change, priorities change. So it's a good time to take a look at it so that everybody's up to speed on what's moving forward and what's coming down the pipeline. So I have a short presentation on how the capital improvements plan fits into the overall planning and budgeting. This 2019-2020, the city adopts a 2-year budget, and so the funds are approved for the 2 years. So this year we're going into one of those. 2019 and 2020 is a 2-year budget that they're going to approve. So going into it, we want to make sure that we have good relationship with the budget, with our capital improvements plan, so that we can start planning for what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And then this year, the finance folks are getting on to the planning bus, so to speak, and they are planning for 6 years as well. They're trying to use the CIP as a way to try and budget dollars for the 6 years, even though it's not approved. It's at least a planning tool. And that's really helpful for us in terms of programming projects and how to get them done. So I'm going to have a disclaimer right up front. We are currently in the process of kind of integrating the budget and the CIP. There's a lot of work that's going on in the background in terms of trying to coordinate these two. You'd think that it would be logical, and this is something that the city should have been doing ever since it was a city. But some of these things are challenging just because of the logistics involved in collecting information on projects, trying to schedule them, trying to determine what fund sources to use, how much money there is, and whether we're allocating and using all our funds appropriately. So it's a very challenging process. That's why finance is a department, and there's 4 or 5 people working on that. And so we're trying to coordinate with them, and we're generating some new tools this year to try and coordinate with the budget, so to make our planning process a little more predictable in terms of going forward. So I'll go through some of that in my presentation. The disclaimer is I don't have the layout of the numbers for the 6 years. I kind of know the projects that are going to happen, when they're going to happen, 2022 or 23, 24, but I don't have the exact numbers because we're kind of still working on them. So we didn't want to put anything out there, and then, the first take, usually people grasp on certain information and then they hold on to it, and then we make changes later, and it's hard to kind of justify some of the changes because the initial numbers were not they were pretty loose. So I'm going to go over like some schematic schedule-wise, but at your next meeting, you'll probably have more numbers and so on. So again, I put this up at our last meeting when we were talking about the housing element. This is kind of like the structure we follow in the planning world, and as you can see, we have the comprehensive plan, we have all the elements, and for implementation, we have capital improvements plan. So capital improvements plan is an implementation tool. So we take all the plans that we do, parks plan, transportation plan, etc., and those have policies, or they have projects, they have funding. We try to funnel those down into the capital improvements plan for implementation, and other budget documents are also there. So I'll go over what makes it a capital facility here in a little bit. So what's a capital facility? It's got to be greater than $50,000. It's got to be expenditure of public funds and should have a life expectancy of 20 years. That's what defines a capital facility. So if it meets that definition, it gets into the plan, and then you can plan for it. So some of the smaller stuff can be in the budget, but may not be in the capital facility plan. So you may have I'm just going to give an example, a restroom restoration, $35,000, somewhere in Flintstone Park or something like that. it's 35,000. Doesn't make that $50,000 mark, it won't be here, but it may be in the budget. So we're talking only about $50,000 in larger projects. So it doesn't encompass all the projects that the city's doing, it just is the bigger projects that the city's doing. We also we define capital maintenance, anytime, like for example, a street overlay is a maintenance project. It's not a rebuilding of a street, but it's greater than $50,000. And if you're extending the life of it for 10 years, then it fits into that definition and will also be in the plan. So those are some of the kind of thresholds that we're planning for in our capital improvements plan. So just like any other document in the city, you want to have goals and policies because you want some kind of direction in terms of how you select projects, how you move them forward, how you fund them, and all of that. So we have some broad goals. We have about 4 goals in our capital improvements plan, current plan. And I paraphrase it here, it's not exact wording. Basically, we want to provide adequate facilities and services, taking into account future population, without reducing our level of service. So, when we do our transportation plan, we note all the level of services, and if there's a deficiency, we're supposed to put that project into a capital improvements plan to take care of that. That's what GMA tells us to do. And that's good planning. So, and there are several policies underneath these goals. Of course, you want to plan in accordance with policies and priorities set. Financial management has its own policies in terms of how to manage funds and how to allocate them for funds. So you want to follow all these policies and priorities when you're designing, when you're planning for projects. You want to do financing in an economic, efficient, and equitable manner. These are great goals to have. Equitable is you want to make sure that you're providing for various services in various parts of the community as opposed to focusing in them just on one area. So you want to be kind of equitable to the entire city. So there's some good goals and policies underneath that. And of course, you want to have cost-effective services within the city and for all the areas that we annex into the city. So these are some of the existing goals in the capital improvements plan. There are several policies. I won't go through them. I just kind of gave you some examples of those. So where do we get our revenue sources for the capital improvements? And there's many revenue sources that come into the city. So we have taxes, we have shared revenues from the state, we have permits and license fees, we have all kinds of revenues coming into the city. Then we have special revenues, which are motor fuel tax, 2% lodging tax, real estate excise tax, impact fees. So those are also revenues that come in. You have debt service. Some of the treatment plant was built with debt service, so that's the sort of revenue. So you got to kind of track those. And then you got grants, and then we talked a little bit in the pre-meeting about the enterprise fund and the proprietary. Those are user-defined fees and a system that's managed within that revenue. And then you have user fees for all kinds of stuff. So these are some of the revenue sources, and you have several revenues sources coming into the city. So we have to find a way to kind of organize them and use them. And that's what most of the financial policies are all about. So how are some of the ways that our financial policies and how are they managed? So basically the finance department splits it into 2, governmental funds and proprietary funds. So governmental funds are usually general funds, special revenue funds, debt service funds, and capital project funds. And the little chart I have here, I know it's really small, but that's governmental funds and that's proprietary funds. And then, if you actually, this is in the budget document. So under those funds, you have a series of other funds like park impact fee funds, arts fund, like I said, REIT funds. So you have them all separated. And there's policies on how to manage each one of them. So it gets complex there. It's just, they all don't go into one source and you can't just use them all. They all come with strings attached. When you collect them from for special taxes, you got to put it towards that. And you got to do it in a certain way. And you got to document it in a certain way. So all of these need to be kind of monitored and coordinated, so to speak, and that's what most of our finance department does. And when we do capital improvements planning, we have our own categorization on how to look at projects in terms of funding, and I'll get into that a little bit. So we all do things a little differently, so we have to kind of coordinate to make sure all our funding sources match up, and how do we spend money. So that's where the challenges really are, and we're making strides in trying to develop tools to get that to be better as every year goes by. So what do we have in our current document? We have goals and policies. We have the financial management policies for our funds and revenues. We have an inventory of existing facilities. We have our level of service from the different transportation plan, parks plan, water, sewer. Everything has a level of service that gets filtered in. And then we have our population projections, because we're going to plan for a certain population. And then you have the facilities plan, which is what is the kind of the bread and butter of the plan, in which we look at all the streets and the parks and all the funds, and we'll go into that a little bit. And then there's facility needs. So we also list our 20-year needs. I mean, we have a lot of streets. A lot of streets will need to be fixed. We can't fix them all in 6 years. So we list the projects that we think we need for the 20 years. And those projects will, at times, whenever we have funding and opportunity, they'll jump into that 6-year list. So we'll want to keep that 20-year list going as well. And of course, we want to talk some about the funding source and have revenue projections. So we know that we have this much of sales tax or REIT funds coming in this year, and finance department will use their wisdom to try and say, okay, we anticipate next year we'll get this much, and then after that it's going to get fuzzy. We'll give you some numbers, but can't say really what it is. So, but we use those projections for our 6-year planning horizon in order to determine how much funds we have. So our current document kind of touches upon all of that. So we're going to jump into the meat of the document. So what we have tracking currently, and again, this is just the starting of the process. And what I have and you can see, I've noted governmental funds, and that'll be kind of that major category under which some of these will fall, separate subcategories fall. So we have streets, and I'm kind of separating streets and arterial because they are two different funds that are managed in that big, and they have slightly different policies, so we want to just identify those. But we have, I'm familiar, and I'll tell you another disclaimer. I know some of the projects in streets and parks, but I may not know all the projects in sewer, storm drain. They come from their own plans. I know some, but I don't know all the details. I'll share with you what I know, but we work with engineering and public works to get the list of projects and coordinate that. And I may not be aware. Steve may be aware more than I am. Yeah, good. So Steve will help me out if you have any specific questions on projects. So the waterfront trail, that's a grant funded, and it's in progress. And what I have indicated here is it's in 2019. Most of that, and this, if you look at the TIP, which I think the Planning Commission recommended last month to the City Council for approval. These will match the timing of when we want to spend the Transportation Improvement Plan dollars, the RTPO grant money and all of that, the federal dollars we're getting. So this schedule will match up with that. So we have the waterfront trail, we have SR20. In fact, I want to just point out that indicating that it's also an economic development project. It's kind of it'll be like a new, there's no street there right now. Those businesses or those property owners along there have a difficult time accessing Highway 20 because it's dangerous for the speed and so on. And so redevelopment has been very challenging there. So an access there will hopefully stimulate some of the use of that property. So it's an economic development project. And it's also an expansion of the street facilities, street infrastructure, so it will also use some of our traffic impact fee dollars that were paid into it. We're going to see asphalt street overlays. Now, some of these, if you look at your existing plan, existing document that was provided, It's probably called as maintenance or some other name. Some of these names are going to change with this new document, but we captured most of the stuff that's in the current document. We have shoreline restoration. This is a fairly new one between Midway and Regatta. Again, these are all kind of draft. I want to say draft because some of them may survive when it goes to city council and some of them may not. So eventually when it moves forward, we're just sharing what is a working document with you. This is not the final. So I can't guarantee that all these projects will end up after city council takes a look at it, but hopefully most of them will. The shoreline restoration, I think it's our Public Works Department identified that we're having some erosion under Pioneer Way, and if we keep at it, we'll soon have some issues there, so we have to kind of do something there. So I think they're at least going to try and study it to see what can be done. And I put shared project because it's shoreline, it's utilities, it's streets. You'll have to kind of bring in a lot of funding sources to protect our infrastructure there. So take a look at that. Hoffman to 16th Trail. This is something, is a project that Oak Harbor is partnering with Island County. Island County is going to take the lead on it, and they want to build a trail, not a trail, a sidewalk, I want to say, which will also be a trail, from north of Otfield, from that gas station park and ride, Hoffman Road kind of meets there, all the way to Northeast 16th. And because it's a partnership project and we're using RTPO federal dollars for it, partnering with the county, for $78,000, you can get a mile of sidewalk coming into the city. It's a great deal. So it's just, and for not much work other than just partnering with them and giving county the money to build it. So that's, it came up as the RTPO and the TIP discussion was going on, so they've added that. Heller Street overlay is on there for the later years, 23, 24. And Northeast 7th Avenue is tracking. See that the funds requested there are $1 million and some odd. That does not cover the total cost of Northeast 7th. Northeast 7th is going to cost us $4.5 million or some. But we don't have that money in the 6 years to build it all. What we're showing is we're going to do the engineering and we're going to buy the right-of-way. We'll have to apply for grant money to do the construction. So as those years move by, in a couple of years from now, I'll be talking about the construction of Northeast 7th Avenue because we'll finish our engineering, we'll get more estimates, we'll apply for grant money. Depending on what we get, we'll start to add that portion of the project into the capital improvements plan. Parks, so Windjammer Park playground equipment, that's going to be expanded with the new park. So some dollars shown there. Neal Street restoration. That's the structure on Whidbey Avenue that could use some restoration work. It's a historical marker. Playground equipment. That's one of the things in the park plan that is very prevalent is to replace aging playground equipment. So we have a few playground in parks that we're planning to upgrade. Pickleball courts, 7th Avenue Wetlands Trail feasibility study out in the later years. I mean, that's been on the park plan agenda for quite a while. It's difficult to find the dollars to spend to it. We're going to try and see if we can use grant money to try and do it. Just because it kind of would serve a nice area in town where there's a mix of uses from industrial to multifamily and different kind of housing types. So, and then the Windjammer Park Phase 2 and Phase 3 improvements on the park side is also in there as part of the parks section. Wastewater, this is where my knowledge gets a little fuzzy, but a lot of this comes from their plan. They are building some structures to deal with biosolid removal from the plant and deal with it. A lot of it has to do with equipment and buildings that they're doing. And they are also replacing a lot of the, on the southeast part of town, they're replacing some lines, older pipes that have a tendency to leak, and and demand resources in terms of repairs, so that they're talking about replacing some of that. So they have a list of things that they are doing to upgrade and keep the infrastructure in good condition. Water, there's a lot of projects here. Some of them are studies, some of them are dependent on studies being done in order for projects to happen. But from my general understanding, there's in the water system plan, they divide the city into kind of zones to try and address the infrastructure and how the pressure is handled in different zones based on the terrain and where pump stations are needed to keep the pressure up, where growth is in order to extend. So they have a system plan, and from here, from what I see in terms of their projects, they're going to try and equalize, I think, pressure on the east side of the city. So they have a line going from the new reservoir by the Gun Club Road all the way to Crescent Harbor, and that'll help all that region upgrade to new pressure system for the water line. And then they also have some plans to make some improvements on the west side by Lowerland in that area of town.
So all great information. I just wanted to share with the commission that the project that's listed at the top of that list is an example of a different way that projects end up on our capital improvement plan. This is, as you can see, it says Banta Road Roundabout Transmission Mains. So State DOT is going to be doing a project here very soon at Banta and SR 20. They're putting in a roundabout and to address some traffic safety concerns that they have at that location. Because our water lines are in their state right-of-way through a franchise agreement, when they have to have a project that potentially impacts our lines, we have to move our lines at our cost. And that's pretty typical for a franchise agreement. We've done it before, at least 2 other times in my time here at the city. So this is an example where the state said to us, we're going to do this project, we're going to do it really quickly. And so we need you to design and move your water lines really quickly. We had almost no notice. So Public Works staff jumped right on that. We have, I think at the last council meeting, or maybe the one before that, we hired a consultant to help do the design for us. I know that we've already met with DOT staff on it, and I think this spring we'll be moving those water lines. Now, whether we hire our own contractor or it's part of the state's contract, I don't know those yet. But the point being is that CAC is talking about the very logical way that we populate the CIP with these projects that come from our street plan, our parks plan, our water plan, our sewer plan. This is a completely other way that we get projects. It's when another agency who has some sort of jurisdiction says, we're going to do this, and it triggers the city to have to do something. So just be aware that those things do happen.
So I'm sorry, you said that this is a project that the state is doing on
Yes.
their road
Yes,
that impacts the city's water mains.
yes,
And the state is going to require you to do this project
yeah,
and pay for it
yes.
on their schedule.
Yeah, that's pretty much how that works.
Yeah.
Other examples where that's happened, it happened at in the vicinity of the Shrimp Shack when they did those improvements. It also happened towards the top of the hill there, just this side of Gibraltar Road, where they recently put in that new roundabout, coming back towards town a ways when they did some of the other highway work. And that's the nature of a franchise agreement. So same token, if in a city street we've allowed a public utility company to have their utility lines in our street, and we end up having to change that street design, maybe lower the grade for some reason, and now their utilities are in danger of being exposed, they have to take care of that on their dime. It's the same thing that's happened to us when the state cuts down the grades to level out the roads, and there's not going to be adequate cover for our lines. It's our responsibility to take care of that. In at least one of those cases, our lines would have been suspended in the air by about 4 or 5 feet. Obviously, that wasn't going to work. And so that's just how this works. Normally, we have like a 3 to 5 year window in which we can sort of systematically do this. This one has a much more sense of urgency to it.
Yeah, good point, and that's why we look at the CIP every year. And now, when this project is included, and having the tools that you project out the revenues for 6 years, all of a sudden you put a big project in next year, it's going to push some of the other projects in the schedule out that you were planning on. So that's why we look at them every year and try to make the adjustments. Stormwater, we have a few projects here as well that are moving along. And again, I bet this will change every year. Stormwater is becoming a bigger factor in everything that the city, any city does around the Puget Sound. And so we can see some changes coming in the next few years as we learn more and more about what we have to do in terms of stormwater and being part of the Puget Sound, around the Puget Sound as a community. We have a few projects at the marina that's also moving forward. I think some of them may be done with grant money, some of them may be just done with, it's an enterprise fund because there's people, the slips generate the dollar amounts to run the marina. And so we have some capital projects over the next 2 years that the marina is trying to get done as well. So when I started off, we talked about the funds and we talked about the revenues a little bit and how we manage. And for the CIP, we look at, these are the main sections, how we categorize the capital facilities to look at, streets and parks. And then you have the enterprise funds, storm, water, sewer, and the marina. That's how we kind of look at capital facility planning. Now, these projects will get funded by different revenue sources, and when the document comes forward to you in October or November, you'll start to see the tables being populated with, okay, here's the project expenditure, how are they being funded, and you'll have the revenue sources at the bottom. Some projects are done with 2 or 3 revenue sources because they qualify for more than one revenue source, so you want to kind of split them up. So there's some Tetris kind of thing that you have to play with the revenue sources because you don't want to, there may be 3 or 4 projects in line, and 3 of them will be okay to use one kind of fund, and then there'll be one that can't, and they'll be very limited in what it can use. So you want to try and fund the limited one with the most of that dollars, and then you have to spread it around. So it's kind of a Tetris to play with the revenues to make sure that you can fund all your projects over the 6 years, and that's what we're working with finance on. So hopefully at the October meeting and November meeting, we'll have a little more information on how these projects will be funded. So, but this is just the draft. These are the projects that are tracking as we speak. So that is all I have for today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Anyone else wants to go first? That's fine. Okay. I took copious notes. This will be on page 5 of the old capital improvement plan. Goal 2, you've got a policy that says program and prioritize city capital improvements for consistency with the comprehensive plan, and you've got 4 different categories of priorities: urgent projects, reconstruction, new projects, and expansion projects. I think it would be very useful to people reading this document if you noted that in your list of projects, which one of those categories they fall into. My sense is that maybe this Northeast 7th project that's been on the books for years and years and years might be migrating through some of these categories, but it would be very useful, I think, to us and probably to the city council to know which ones the staff thinks are the urgent projects that really need to be done right away. So that would be great. There's some numbers in here and that I'm wondering how current they are. I know this is on page 10 in talking about law enforcement. It's got some numbers about the staffing level of the police department that come from 2006, which is 10 years before this document. I was wondering if we have any current numbers for those.
We probably will update those. We have a plan to, we send it away to all the departments and we ask them to updated. Sometimes we get information, sometimes we don't, so.
Okay, fair enough. And one of the things that, in reading over this, that struck me as odd is a little bit further down that same page and talking about senior services, that the city does passport processing, 900 to 1,000 applications a year. And I'm baffled why the city of Oak Harbor would be doing passport applications.
I'll let Steve answer
help
that
with
question.
Because
Fair
it's a revenue generator for us.
Oh, well, okay then.
There was a time when you only got passports either at the post office or you actually went to the passport place in
Right.
Seattle, right? And the federal government started to outsource that a bit. And one of the prior senior services administrators latched onto that as a way to generate some revenue. And this is now fairly common in other places that do that. And so we process passports. And there was actually a time when our post office stopped doing it. So if you wanted to do it in town, we were the only game in town, so to speak. I think they've now since started it back again, but on a very limited basis. And so our staff at that time went to all of the training required. We're a certified place, a certified center for the processing of it. And I don't remember what it is that we charge in addition to the passport fee, but we offer the opportunity to make an appointment to come in and all of that. So it's actually a really good revenue generator for us, and we're providing a needed service to the community of Oak Harbor.
Oh, okay. Well, all in favor of revenue sources like that. A little bit further on, there's under enterprise funded activities, under water, it says that our agreement with the city of Anacortes extends through the year 2025. What happens after that?
We'll probably renew the agreement. I'm hoping
I hope
that we
so.
do. Yeah. We got a pipeline and we're fixing it, so we'll make investments to make sure that we still get water from them.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're one of their biggest customers, so.
So pretty favorable
It's a
for
symbiotic relationship, right?
Okay.
And we have NAS Whidbey on our side.
Yeah, who is our biggest customer, yeah.
Yeah.
True. I noticed in a little bit further down from that, if we're talking about reservoirs, the East Service or the East Reservoir, which is about 1/6 of our reservoir capability, is scheduled for demolition. I haven't seen anywhere where there's a replacement project.
I don't know if there's a need for some of these reservoirs, the older ones. I don't know if there's a need. So they may be like maintenance liabilities after a while. So if the Gun Club Reservoir, I think there's one of the projects is to provide a pipeline that goes through Gun Club Road, Northeast 16th, all the way to Crescent Harbor. And that could eliminate the need for that East Reservoir.
It has, and the East Side Reservoir was built at a time when those kinds of projects didn't pay a ton of attention to seismic issues.
Okay.
And so it's cost prohibitive to even think about trying to retrofit it to meet the seismic standards. And so CAC is correct that when we built the new one at Gun Club Road, we took into account the loss of the old East Side one, which is basically right across the street from Olympic View Elementary School. We also have land capacity at the Gun Club site to build another reservoir. And so we really have all the land that we need, and that one is sized so we can take this other one offline.
Okay. I don't have any context for this, but in this document it says that the city uses about 1.44 million gallons of water a day. And these three reservoirs, including the one that's going to be demolished, are 3 million gallons. So we have a 2-day, maybe 3-day supply of water if something were to happen to the pipeline coming across from Anacortes.
We also have emergency wells that still continue to function here. And then we also have interties between our system and the Navy's system. So between the two systems, we can handle things in an event of a disaster. And so I know we meet the State Department of Health's requirement for water storage. That's a big thing that they look at.
Sure.
I think we actually exceed it by some. Some might think, well, gosh, we should have a 30-day storage capacity. Well, you couldn't possibly build that much capacity or afford to build that much capacity. But between the reservoirs that we have, plus our interties with the Navy and their reservoirs, and our wells, we can operate in an emergency circumstance. We might have to all change how we use our water, but we have the ability to produce water here.
Okay. A lot of talk in the news about the need for disaster preparation, and that kind of stuck out to me. Under the North Whidbey Parks and Recreation District, with the pool, what happens if the levee fails again? I've heard some talk that the city should take over the pool. I don't know if there's any plan for doing that or that it would necessarily be a good idea. Is that something that's on your radar?
That one is too fluid of a situation for us really to be able to address in the capital improvement plan. We own the land,
Okay.
so there's that relationship that's already there. I think while everybody would like to know what that answer is before that situation might occur, I think the reality is that there's no good way for us to really work our way through those topics until and if we need to do that.
Yeah. Would that be a capital acquisition?
Of a massive proportion. and frankly, beyond the capital side of things, you have to work your way through the thought process and the discussion as to whether or not that's a responsibility that the city would want to take on. Operating something like that is something outside of our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
What are the risk management ramifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And so we will cross that bridge if we have to.
Fair enough. Okay. Jack, in your slide, I think it's slide number 7, where you had the list of the funds in really tiny print.
Yep.
Just so I kind of have a better sense of this, when this document talks about revenue sources, contributions from beginning fund balance, and it talks about streets in Fund 101 and transportation impact fees in Fund 105, is that what those blue boxes are?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. One of the things that I noticed in here is that there are expected lifespans for some pieces of the capital facilities, the wastewater, the water system and the sewer system, and almost all of these items in the source and pump station list are getting pretty close to the end of their lifespan. And yet, I'm not sure that I saw a lot of plans to replace these items. The East Side Reservoir, we talked about already, is well past 50 years. The West Side Reservoir is past 50 years. Well number 8 and 9 are both at 57 years. The Altfield Pump Station, the West Side Reservoir, the 2 million gallon one, the well number 11, those are all from the mid-70s. They're going to be reaching the end of their life here within the scope of this plan or shortly thereafter. Do we need to have some projects in this list for replacing some of these facilities?
Good question. Maybe, depending on whether we have the funding sources to do that within the 6-year plan, or whether we can somehow extend the existing life of it till we have the funds to it. So for the 6 year, it's just chunks of 6 year. We have a lot of streets that
Sure.
could use work. We just don't have the funding, right? So we just have to, it's similar to that we have to find a way to extend some of these facilities till we can afford to replace them with the current fee structure without reducing level of service. So it's, maybe we should, but it's just, I trust our water department to know what projects need to be prioritized, and they have a plan, a water system plan, that was recently adopted, I think, that talks about the projects that they need to be focusing on. So they're taking it in chunks, and we plan for it accordingly.
Okay.
So
fair enough.
another piece of information I think might be, if we look at page 23 of the document itself, which is page 40 of 69 of the master page. Those are the projects which would fall outside of the 6-year window.
Right.
And, you know, some of those are pump stations, some of those are new water mains. And one of the things that neither CAC nor I could help you with is that the nature of a water system or a sewer system is that as you make improvements to it, pieces of the infrastructure may no longer be necessary. So something that might be reaching the end of its useful life may actually be able to be taken offline entirely because we've made an improvement someplace else. And so my suspicion is that a healthy number of these projects help with some of those things that you were talking about, and it's the way the entire system functions. For instance, a big part of what we accomplished with the reservoir at Gun Club Road was to rebalance some of the pressure areas. And so by doing that project, that changed how we wanted to look at some other projects. It actually took one complete project offline. We originally thought we needed another water reservoir down by Fort Nugent Park, of all places. Turned out that that was not going to be necessary, the way that the overall system was going to operate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And then we do, as much as we can, obviously, we continue to perform a high level of maintenance to eke out as much life as possible out of our respective pieces of the utilities.
Okay, that's fair, but what that implies, what I'd like to see in this then is, back here in this capital facilities inventory, it would be great if these items all had, and there's a cost column here, which I assume is the replacement cost. It would be great if this inventory included what the usable life is expected to be. And in the case of things like these items that are reaching the end of that usable life, if there was a note that said, we're not planning on replacing this because changes we've made to the system make it obsolete. That would be very helpful to anybody who's reading this document.
Good information. We're not there yet in terms of just putting in something here, because it's
Okay.
not just up to me and Steve to put
Sure.
20 years, 30 years. Usually we do it through the planning process when a plan is done. But good points, though, to try and start funneling our planning processes to document that information so that we can funnel it into the CIP.
Yeah.
Because we're fast approaching the need to redo the water system plan. There's actually a state requirement on that one that we have to do it every 6 years, and they take that pretty seriously. And so I think we're actually rolling up on that within the next year or so. And those, at risk of repeating myself, that's the document that really helps inform what we're doing here. And so maybe we can include that as part of that process so that it's easier to transfer that information from the water system plan into the CIP plan.
Yeah.
Because no one reads the water system plan except us, you folks. There's would be no reason for you to ever read the water system plan.
Well, idle curiosity, but you sure. Okay. I think that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good comments.
No, Alan hit it with what I was going to ask, so we're good.
Glad I could help.
I've got a lot then. Kat, could you just go over the timing of this plan, when we're going to see it again, when we're going to have our last shot at it, when it's going to city council, and when it has to be approved by? Because, you know, there's a lot of little things in here, obviously, that need to be changed. For example, talking about the Vanderzit pool, adding additional swim areas, a water slide, and warm water therapy area.
Yeah.
They're lucky if they get operating again, much less adding things.
So the document that you have is last year's document,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So we are updating it as we speak. So we'll be contacting all these. We usually contact the school district, the library, all of them, and say, here's what's in our plan, here's the information, can you update and send it to us? Because we don't track a lot of that stuff and we get it from them, yeah. So the schedule. So what I'm hoping is at the October meeting, we'll look at projects, we'll look at some numbers. Instead of having green spaces here, you'll actually see numbers, and you'll also see the revenue sources that are funding those in those respective years.
Will we have a red line document of this thing?
Potentially, if everything is tracking. If anything, at the November meeting, for sure, you'll have a newer document along with the numbers. But at least you'll have the numbers and the projects for the October meeting. If we can get you the document for moving along, chugging along, we'll get you that as well.
So when does the city council have to have this? By December
We,
25th or
by December, they have to approve this. They're going through the budget process as well, so there'll be a lot of changes, because the budget process is tracking simultaneous to this. So changes they make at the budget level will also impact this. So depending on how they make their decisions in October or November, we may be making changes all the way to the very end, because it's a budget year, you know. So we'll be looking at some projects and numbers at the next meeting, and then by November, hopefully, we'll be looking at a document and the tables.
And so our commitment to you, Planning Commission, would be to get it into your hands as soon as we can. So in other words, for the November meeting, which is, I think, our last time to really talk to you about it, if we can get it into your hands in advance of when we would normally have a packet to you, we will certainly do that. We recognize that there's a lot of material here, and we want to give you as much time as we can. It's just, as CAC has explained, it's a little more challenging for us when we are also doing the budget at the same time.
Sure. So speaking of the budget, the city council had a special meeting about 2 weeks ago to go over the budget. Were you guys privy to what came out of that, or did any final decisions get made at that meeting that impact our capital improvement plan? Do you know?
I was there, participated in that conversation, and I think that there were some things that clearly, if I can recall, were of priority to council. I mean, they were very interested in the Northeast 7th Avenue project, as we all are. I can recall specifically that the topic of dredging for the marina came up, and that's not on our list, and it hasn't been for some time just because of the extreme cost associated with that. Council was uncomfortable with that, and so they directed that we at least start talking about some sort of dredging feasibility study, and wanted it at no later than the last year. It's 2024, so we're going to be putting that in there. So there was some conversation about specific projects that will help inform what we've got going on here, but there wasn't what I would consider to be a wholesale change of projects.
Okay. So just let me get into some specific things here. The SR 20 Fackmer Road property access road, we've talked about that before. That was not in the transportation improvement plan this year, even though it was last year. And I know that you're talking about it being funded by grant and not being funded by general funds, but
Well, last year, it was supposed to be funded by grants. That's why it was in there. This year, I think the revenue sources are going to change for that.
so is that why it wasn't in the transportation improvement plan, but we're leaving it in the capital improvement plan?
That's correct, because that's that's grant money that was, well, I think it was anticipated that we're going to use economic development grant money that comes not from the RTPO on the tip that we looked at, it comes from a different source.
Right.
But that's why it's not in the tip. It's not using federal dollars.
My understanding last year was that you were also looking at economic development grants for that, though. Because I specifically asked that question.
Yeah,
last
well, we
year.
want to keep our funding options open, but from our perspective, it has its greatest chance of being funded if we pursue it through the .09 funds, because we don't think that we're going to have the ability to do that with local funds. And I think CAC is correct. It would not have qualified for RTPO funds.
So it's not in the tip because it's not using federal dollars. It can still use the .09 funds, which is still grant money, which is just not coming through the federal dollars, and that's why it's not in the tip and it's in the CIP.
In last year, we talked about a future Park A of $1.5 million and open space was near Crosby of 4 million, and then this time you're talking about Harbor Heights land of, I want to say it was like 2.5 million or something like that.
Kat, can you go back to that one?
Slide 10.
So I can address that for you. So the last CIP, as well as included two different areas, I think, for land acquisition, and one of them actually was funded in the 2017-2018 budget.
Right.
As we looked at where we think our opportunities were in terms of trying to acquire a large parcel of land, it really, there wasn't anything down on the south end where we had originally hoped to have been or thought about being. We saw an opportunity for this one that we've identified as the Harbor Heights land acquisition. That's just because that's the name of the company that owns the land. It's the 70 acres that's near our gun club water facility.
Yeah, north of Redway,
And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're actively working with the RCO, the State Recreation Conservation Office, for grant funding. We have some preliminary indication that we'll be successful for a little bit. And so this seems to be our best opportunity to pursue acquiring a sizable number of acres to help meet some of our park needs in the future.
And does that include any of the development of that, or is that just the land purchase, do you know?
That's just the land cost there. It does not include any of the development costs. That would be separate. But of course, what we don't have is, we're a long ways away from actually negotiating a purchase and sale agreement. We have an owner who is interested in listening to us, and that's about as far as we are. We had their support to apply for the grants, which was important. And so, like many of the things, it'll be a long-term process. If we're successful in receiving the grant, we won't receive that until July of 19. And we're trying to hold on to the monies that we had approved in the last budget, to keep into this budget, to go with the possible grant, which will move us closer to that $2.12 million number, and then we would presumably get into negotiations.
Gotcha. And then West Side Fire Station, is that not in the plan for the next 6 years?
It remains in the general government list, I believe.
Did I miss it? I'm sorry.
Oh, I had one more
There
slide.
it is.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I didn't see the windmill. Did I see the windmill? Which got torn down yesterday?
We would involve that, we would envision that being part of the future Windjammer phases.
So that's
And
under
so-
the
and so what-
phase 2 and 3
Phase
that you
2
had
and
up there?
3. Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be called out as a separate project unless for some reason we needed to pursue it separately from the Windjammer Park. But right now, I think staff is thinking about it in terms of other phases of Windjammer Park.
Okay. And then on page 31 in here where you talk about, what is it, other special assessment districts, this is where the Transportation Benefit District comes in?
Yes, that's fairly exciting. As you might recall, the council approved the formation of a transportation benefit district a few months ago. We have our first meeting with them as them functioning as the Transportation Benefit District Board next Tuesday, the hour immediately preceding their council meeting. And we will start that process of working with them to determine how they might want to go about funding the district. Again, two choices, the additional sales tax which can be imposed, or the car registration tab fees.
And if they decide to do something along either one of those lines, those funds have to be spent on roads, is that correct?
Correct. The advantage of that funding source for us is that we can use it on local streets, where many of the funding sources that CAC has told you about aren't eligible for local streets. So our TPO, I mean, that's our go-to funding source. It's a great funding source. Federal dollars, relatively stable. The process is pretty well known. It's pretty predictable. Major drawback, you can't use it on local streets. So we can use it on our arterials, but the street in front of your house is not going to get fixed with those dollars. Transportation Benefit District, those dollars can be used on any of our streets. And so that's the real attractiveness of that particular funding source.
Okay. And then the last thing I've got is to kind of piggyback on something that Councilor Heisen mentioned a few weeks ago at one of the city council meetings. She was concerned basically about what to me I understood to mean kind of what you alluded to, a lack of maintenance of some things. For example, the windmill. Because we didn't have an idea of when it needed to be replaced, and we didn't necessarily have funds in the budget to maintain it to a level that it didn't need to be demolished, I'm concerned that there's other things out there, and perhaps we need to have a long-term plan to come up with something that we in the condo business call a reserve study, which is basically you look at something over the life of 30 years and when does it all need to be replaced. And I know that we kind of are doing that on these individual plans. For example, the water plan mandates it, the water system plan, and the sewer system plan and the stormwater plan all mandate all those kind of things. But our parks plan doesn't mandate that. And I don't know that there's any other capital facilities plan that mandates that we look at when does City Hall need to be replaced. I know there's been talk for many years about doing that, but
So, great comments, and we wouldn't argue that point at all. But I think the answer to that thought actually lies in how you described the situation. So for our enterprise funds, where we have a reliable funding source funded by user fees, it's very, very logical and possible for us to do that kind of thing. Even for vehicle replacements, right? So when Storm Drain needs a new Vector truck to help clean storm drains out and clean the streets, we've been budgeting for that for X number of years in what's called the Equipment Rental Fund. That sets aside a little bit each year, so when it comes time to buy a new one of those things, which costs $200,000 or $300,000, we've got the money set aside. I mean, it's a tried and true process. For those things which require general fund dollars, that becomes much more difficult to do, because that same general fund dollar that could be set aside for maintenance in a park may also be the thing which is necessary in the fire department to fund somebody, or in the police department, or in City Hall. And so we're constantly in this tension of present needs versus long-term replacement. That's where the challenge comes on that, and that's where we see ourselves having greater difficulty in putting funds aside. The marina is kind of interesting because it's an enterprise fund, and we generate all of the money that we need through what happens down there. And so we can only spend those dollars in the marina. Yet, since it's obviously a highly mobile customer base, they're not physically connected. They can't, they can go away if we charge too much. We have to be really careful on how much we charge, which then makes it harder for us to set aside money to do the long-term maintenance of the facility. So we're very cognizant of it. It's really tied to how reliable are those general fund dollars, and how can we decide to best use them.
thanks.
And that's one of the things that in the pre-meeting I talked about the Washington Transportation Plan, and they recognize that as well. The needs of the system are in such a way that the source of the funds are not able to be applied to those. So we have a lot of funding sources that come into the general fund that everything has to compete with, and you question about why do streets have to compete with. And so that plan identifies that we need to start thinking about different ways to generate revenues to tackle issues like what you're talking about. Our current revenue sources are all rooted in different ways of planning than the issues that are starting to come up now. So it takes a philosophy of different planning and different revenue sources to try and tackle some of the issues that you're talking about. It's difficult to tackle them with the current system of how things are running. So, and that takes time, effort, plan by plan by plan, philosophy, culture. It's a bigger piece than just finding a study that identifies all your maintenance projects, and then you're going, well, we don't have funding for that. And it has to compete with the fire station and the firemen and all of that. So it's
We
a different
actu-
philosophy.
So we actually did have, years ago, we had a replacement for City Hall in the CIP, and that, I think, left the CIP somewhere around 2008, 2009, because it became really apparent that we weren't going to get there. But it didn't stop us from thinking about it in the early 2000s as to what happens when this building reaches the end of its useful life, which I'm deathly afraid that somebody's going to say that about me. So I have to really be careful when I use that phrase, when Steve has reached the end of his useful life. But we just recognized we couldn't possibly start to set aside enough money for a new city hall and still meet some of our other more pressing needs within the general fund.
If that's true, you've got a very serious problem in the long term. Condo is a great example. I used to be on the homeowners association of my condo community down in Linwood, and if you don't have enough money in the general funds to put some into reserves and do your ongoing maintenance, sooner or later you're going to have some very serious financial problems. I think that putting those usable life dates into this inventory is going to really strengthen your case for the city council for, we need to think about replacing some of these facilities.
So I'm going to be real, I want to make sure I'm real clear about this because somewhere our finance director is twitching. We have all of the necessary reserves that the city needs to operate as a city.
Okay.
And we have, in fact, we have more than what the generally accepted accounting standards would say. In fact, the council a number of years ago put into place something called a stabilization fund, which indicated that they should have a certain number of millions of dollars or 25% of the general fund, whichever number is greater. And so that has been building up for some time, but that's in something known as the stabilization fund. Think of it as our rainy day fund if we really have some serious problems. So we are in absolute sound financial shape when it comes to those kinds of things. The problem isn't so much knowing how to put money away and how to program it and to do those kinds of things. The problem is more on the incoming side, on the revenue side. And not to belabor the point, but the big shift in Washington State happened right at 2000 when, through the citizens' initiatives, there was a dramatic change in how local government was funded. And when we moved away from being able to use motor vehicle excise taxes as a means for stabilization of those cities and counties which had lower than normal sales tax revenues, that was a fundamental shift in the dollars that came to local government. And that's what really put a crimp in everybody's ability to have something that was more or less a healthy general fund. Then when you look at some communities like ours that have a sort of a different land use mix, we don't have the commercial that you would typically expect to see or industrial base for a community of 22,000. It's because we have a great economic engine here that drives our economy in a very steady kind of way, but that also has some land use implications for us.
Sure.
Those are the factors which sort of combine to say the general fund is always going to be the scarcest of the funds, and they're the ones which are in the highest demand.
Yeah.
But again, so that my finance director doesn't freak out, I'll be very clear. We have a healthy general fund when it comes to our stabilization account. We certainly operate with all of the reserves that we're supposed to have, and we have more than that, actually.
Well, that's comforting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anybody else have anything for CAC?
No.
Thanks, CAC.
All right, thank you.
As CAC began talking, I noticed Island County Commissioner District 2, Jill Johnson came in. Do you have anything that you wanted to say on public record? Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. The next regular business meeting is going to be October 23rd, 2018, a pre-meeting starting at 6 and the official meeting kicking off at 6:30 in this room. If nobody has anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to vote on that.